Guys, have you ever wondered what the hell is going on with the doctrine of hell? Do you really think the vast majority of humanity is going to burn in torment and anguish forever? Or could there be a way of interpreting this doctrine that is biblical, historical, theologically sound, and more congruent with the character and nature of God revealed in Jesus? Well, the good news is there is another way of interpreting that doctrine, and that's what's led my friend Keith Giles to write his new book, Jesus, Undefeated. Check it out.
So, hey everybody, how you doing? It's Keith, and I'm here with my friend Jared Gustafson. I am in El Paso, Texas. Jared, you're in,
I didn't know
where are
that.
you in?
I'm in San Marcos at the time.
All right.
Yeah.
And he's at a coffee shop right now. I'm at my brand new house we just moved into a week ago here in El Paso, Texas. And what we wanted to talk about was I've got this new book coming out called Jesus Undefeated, Condemning the False Doctrine of Eternal Suffering. And so, yeah, nothing controversial.
Right off the bat.
Yeah, I don't want to upset anybody. But yeah, we thought we had actually, it was funny because Jared actually got really excited about the book.
Yes.
And read an advanced copy of it and had the idea, hey, why don't we get together and do these little videos, like some short video clips, where we just kind of go through the book a little bit and talk a little bit about the idea of the book and maybe chapter by chapter, do little, just, kind of teasery conversations about it. And I thought, well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Keith, it's an honor to sit down with you. I'm really excited about this book. I feel like I was personally kind of tormented with this idea of eternal conscious torment for a lot of my childhood, and it really drove a lot of my doing in the world, a lot of my trying to save the lost, a lot. So it was a lot of burdens were sitting on me. And so once that idea is a little bit, when you're free of that idea or a little liberated from that idea, I feel like so much opportunity to connect with God and others. So I'm excited about this book. I do feel like a lot of the books dealing with the topic of like Patristic Universalism or, the idea of hell, some of them can get so academic and you can start to get buried. So one of the things I'm really excited about you writing this is you have such an ability to tap into a language of the people. And so, yeah, I'm excited about this book. I would love to ask you just a few questions about, just by way of introduction, can you tell us about what really motivated you to write this book?
Well, it's kind of, I think it's an interesting story. What motivated me to write this book was my publisher, Ralph Palindo. And honestly, I've been doing this Jesus series, right?
Right.
And I had planned the book I was going to write next was going to be, instead of this book, was going to be one about the second coming, called Jesus Unexpected. I eventually will write that book, but that was the next one in line after I do Jesus Unveiled. Well, it actually started I think about a year ago. Ralph and I were driving in the car and said, Keith, I think you need to write a book about Patristic Universalism. And I said, I don't think that's, I don't think so. I said, there's other guys out there that are like, that's more their expertise.
Yeah.
And I told him, like people like Richard Murray and Brad Jerzak and people I look up to, people that I go to if I'm going to study the topic, I look at what they wrote. And so I just kind of passed on it.
Yeah.
And then about a year later, so it was a year later, he came back to me and said, Keith, I really, really think you need to do it.
Persistent.
Yeah. And you know what? So he kind of tricked me. So what I did, well, maybe I tricked myself. I don't know. So when he came back to me the second time, I just kind of thought, well, if I was going to write this book, what would I talk about? So I wrote an outline. I just kind of wrote an outline of like, well, chapter 1, I talk about this. And then I maybe chapter 2, I talk about that. And I just outlined the book. And after I had the outline in front of me on the page, I just looked at it and said, I think I want to write this book.
Yeah.
So, and then the more I started writing it, the more I was like, you know what? He was right. This is not only the book I should write next. I do think it's a book that needs to be written. I think it's a very, very important topic, and I know people are struggling with it right now.
Why do you think it's so important? What's at the bottom of that?
Well, I don't know. I think part of it is, I think the doctrine of eternal torment is something that has kind of held Christians captive for a long, long time, for way too long. in fear, bondage to fear, and motivating them through fear. And I think with all this wave of deconstruction that's been going on the last 4 or 5 years, where more and more people are questioning their faith. And I think this particular topic is one that for many people, I think Brad Jerzak points this out in the foreword to the book, that that this doctrine of eternal torment, while it's intended to be an evangelistic tool to sort of scare people into loving Jesus,
exactly,
that it actually backfires. That actually it's actually, believe it or not, it's actually something that's preventing a lot of people from becoming Christians, because they say, if that's who the God you worship is like, I don't want to believe that God.
I'm not that interested. Actually, you mentioned Brad Jerzak. He says in the foreword of the book, even if threats of an eternal furnace seem to work, is a gospel of fear and punishment congruent with the perfect love that drives out fear of punishment? Of course it isn't. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, man. I think the more, so in the book I talk about this, right? So there's this sort of different, and there are 3 different views, and this is something I point out in the book, and most Christians are very unaware of this when I tell them. That's one of the reasons I felt like I needed to write the book, just to let Christians know, hey, if you study church history and you go back to the very beginning of early church history, what you see is that the Christian church has always, from the beginning, always had 3 different views of what happens to someone who dies apart from Christ. We think there's only one. We think there's only one Christian view.
That itself is just like mind-opening. What?
Yeah.
There's other views to the afterlife?
Yeah.
And that are biblical?
Yes, they're biblical. They're and that's the thing. So they're Christian views. They're based on Scripture, and all 3 views. And I make this point too in the book. In fact, I take time to go through all 3 views and show you what each of those 3 views Scriptures are based on. So I just, if nothing else, I mean, even if that's all I accomplished, Jared, was to as many Christians as possible could know that there have always been 3 Christian views, that the church from the beginning has always been sort of like debating this issue from Scripture. All 3 are taking Scripture, reading it, and some people are reading it this way, and so they come up with one view. Some people read it a different way, and they come up with a different view, and a third group reads it still another way, and has another view. And all 3 views are biblical and scriptural.
What I hear a lot of times, it's the Bible's so clear that there is a hell. And if you even suggest that people aren't going to eternally burn for forever and ever and ever, it's like you don't even believe the Bible, you don't read the Bible, you're not a real Christian. And there's this pop culture understanding of what universalism is. And if you're a universalist, then you don't take your Christian faith very seriously. Can you explain patristic universalism in just a few sentences?
Yeah. And thanks for asking that, because it's a pretty key thing. I think when people hear the word universalism, unfortunately, what most Christians, the picture they get in their mind is, oh, what you're saying is it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter. There's no consequences for any of your actions. You can just be a murderer, rapist, believe in Buddha, or worship, the spaghetti monster. And then when you die, ding, you wake up in heaven, and God just says, come on over here. Isn't it great? So that is not patristic universalism. So patristic universalism, it's not an ollie ollie oxen free. Everybody just gets in and strolls into heaven, free and easy. The patristic universalism is the belief that that there are consequences for our actions, that it is better to know Christ and love him and follow him in this life. I think what I try to point out in the book is that all 3 views share something in common, which is that all 3 views believe that if you die apart from Christ, you will pass through the fire. Even patristic universalism. So again, most Christians think that when they hear universalism, they think that means a belief without sort of the fire thing. There is fire, but the difference in the 3 views, what they disagree on. So they agree that if you die apart from Christ, you will go through the fire. So that they all agree on. What they disagree on is the
what is the fire?
What is the fire? Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say fire? What is that fire? What is the purpose of the fire?
Mm-hmm.
And how long? What the duration is? How long would that
Right.
last?
Right.
And so again, all three views though are basing it on Scripture.
So this is a biblical, backed in history, theology. It's got reference to like Athanasius and Gregory of Nyssa and like great fathers of the faith and theologians of our time, and it's looking differently at the potential afterlife, or
and you know what? Yeah, and here's the thing. What I really loved when I was writing this book, I have a good friend, and every time I would talk to him about, I could see he was struggling. He internally was struggling with this idea. Like he wasn't comfortable really with a lot of the parts about the character of God that gets sort of pulled up when you talk about eternal suffering. He wasn't comfortable with that, but he still felt like, well, but there are these scriptures, and so he still had this idea of universalism as this ali oxen free, everybody gets in, so it doesn't matter what you believe. So when I was writing the book, I really had my friend in mind. His name is Mark.
Right.
And when I finished the book, I gave it to him and I said, do me a favor, could you read this? Because I want to get a perspective from someone who doesn't automatically agree with me already.
Right.
And I think you're a perfect person to kind of come back to me and give me some feedback. And he came back to me and said, Keith, I mean, after he read it, we got together and he was like, Keith, this makes so much sense. He said, it's a Christ-centered, what you're saying is that it's a Christ-centered universalism. And he said,
there it is.
I didn't think that was possible but now that I've read your book, Keith, I think I get it. It makes sense to me now. So for me, I'm already, I mean, if anybody else likes it or not, I don't care. Like I was so excited that my friend got it, and he was like, you set me free. Like I can now really say that God is like Jesus. He loves, he's compassionate, he's caring. And so, yeah, it's a Christ-centered universalism, which I want to make sure people understand that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that's so different from well, you can follow any God you want. They're all kind of the same. They all kind of lead to the same source. And Jesus is one path. Like that's not what you're talking about. This is a Christ, the victor, the one who conquers and saves the lost. And so I'm really excited about your book. I'm excited about it. Thanks for doing a little introduction video. Let's talk about chapter 1.